Sophia, honestly, if you need $20 for the bus ride back to your little studio apartment, just ask. Do not embarrass Dad by begging at the table. Brad's voice was smooth, coated in that oily layer of condescension that always made my skin crawl. He tapped his silver fork against the rim of his crystal wine glass, the sharp ding silencing the entire dining room. My father, Marcus, looked down at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. My mother, Bernice, just adjusted her pearls and offered a tight, apologetic smile to Brad, her son-in-law, as if I were an unruly pet that had just tracked mud onto the carpet. I sat there, gripping the linen napkin in my lap until my knuckles turned white. I am Sophia Williams, 38 years old, and in that moment, to them, I was nothing more than the family failure, the charity case, the daughter who disappeared for 15 years and came back with empty hands. Brad smirked, taking a sip of the vintage red wine I had brought, clearly unimpressed. What he did not know was that in exactly 12 hours, the dynamic in this room would shift so violently it would leave them breathless. I closed my eyes and pictured the moment that was coming. The moment when General Sterling, a man my father had worshipped for 20 years from afar, would walk through our front door. I imagined my father rushing to bow, my mother trembling in her best dress, and I imagined the general walking right past them, ignoring Brad's outstretched hand, marching straight up to me, snapping his heels together and saluting with the precision of a blade. "Good morning, Colonel Williams," he would say. The look on Brad's face when he realized the woman he offered bus fare to was the one signing his company's paychecks would be worth every second of this humiliation. Before I tell you how I destroyed my brother-in-law's ego and saved the United States government $2 billion in the process, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever been the black sheep who was actually the shepherd in disguise, hit that like and subscribe button. This story is for you. My journey back to hell began 4 hours earlier. I was driving a dented, dust-covered 2015 Ford Taurus down the interstate toward the wealthy suburbs of Virginia. To the untrained eye, the car was a piece of junk. The paint was peeling on the bumper, and the muffler rattled just enough to sound pathetic. It was the perfect camouflage. Under the hood, the engine was a reinforced military-grade beast capable of outrunning a Porsche, and the windows were bulletproof glass rated to stop a sniper round. But my family did not need to know that. To them, this car was just proof that Sophia had failed. I checked my rearview mirror. No tail. Just the gray highway stretching out behind me. My encrypted phone sat in the passenger seat, silent for now. My official title at the Pentagon was Program Executive Officer, overseeing defense contracts. My clearance level was so high that if I told my father what I actually did, would have to arrest him. To my family, however, I was just Sophia the dropout who left home at 23 and drifted around the world working odd jobs. They thought my time in Afghanistan was spent washing dishes in a mess hall, not coordinating drone strikes and negotiating with tribal warlords. I turned off the highway and navigated through the winding, tree-lined streets of the gated community my parents called home. The houses here were massive brick monstrosities with manicured lawns that looked like they were cut with nail scissors. It was the kind of neighborhood where people called the police if your car was too old or your music was too loud. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the ghost of the little girl who never felt good enough in this environment. As I pulled into the long paved driveway, I saw her, my mother, Bernice. She was standing on the front porch, arms crossed, wearing a floral dress that probably cost more than my first car. She was watching me approach with the same expression one might have when spotting a cockroach in a salad. I parked the Ford near the garage, the engine sputtering dramatically as I cut the ignition. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Showtime, Sophia. I opened the door and stepped out, stretching my legs. "Hi, Mom," I called out, trying to keep my voice light. She did not move to hug me. She did not smile. She came down the steps quickly, her heels clicking on the stone, waving her hands frantically. "No, no, absolutely not," she hissed, pointing at my car. "You cannot park that thing there, Sophia." I blinked, looking at the empty driveway. "There is plenty of room, Mom. Dad is not home yet." "It is not about space," she snapped, lowering her voice but increasing the intensity. "Look at it. It is an eyesore. Brad and Andre just bought the new Tesla Model X. It is parked in the garage right now. If the neighbors see this heap of scrap metal next to their beautiful car, what will they think? They will think we are running a junkyard." I felt a sharp sting of rejection, familiar and cold. It had been 3 years since I had seen her, and her first concern was the Homeowners Association aesthetic. "Move it around the back," she commanded, pointing toward the narrow, muddy path that led behind the house near the garbage cans. "Park it behind the shed so it is not visible from the street. And hurry up! The Davises next door are having a garden party. I do not want them to see you driving that." I clenched my jaw, but nodded. "Sure, Mom. Whatever you say." I got back into the car, reversing it and driving it onto the grass, tucking it behind the tool shed where the lawnmower was kept. The mud splattered onto the tires. I patted the dashboard of the Ford. "Sorry, old girl," I whispered. "They do not know you are worth more than this entire house." I grabbed my duffel bag, a simple, battered canvas bag that I had carried through 3 combat tours, and a gift bag containing a bottle of wine. I walked back to the front door, wiping the mud from my boots on the mat before entering. The air inside the house was cool and smelled of lavender and expensive cleaning products. It was silent, pristine, and completely unwelcoming. I walked into the foyer, expecting to see the family gallery wall. Growing up, there had been photos of all of us. Me at my high school graduation, Andre at his Little League games, my parents on their anniversary. I stopped dead in my tracks. The wall had been rearranged. My high school graduation photo? Gone. My photo from the debate team championship? Gone. Even the awkward family portrait from when I was 10 was missing. In their place were large, glossy, professional prints of Andre. Andre graduating from college. Andre shaking hands with some local politician. And in the center, a massive framed photo of Andre and Brad at their wedding, smiling radiantly, holding champagne flutes. It was a shrine to the golden child and his successful husband. I had been completely erased. It was as if I had never lived here. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Emotions were a liability in my line of work. I had learned to compartmentalize trauma before breakfast. I walked into the kitchen where my mother was busy arranging flowers in a crystal vase. "Mom," I said, my voice steady, "where are my pictures?" She did not look up. "Oh, we redecorated last spring. Brad said the hallway felt too cluttered. We wanted a more modern, streamlined look. Minimalist, you know." "Minimalist," I repeated. "So you minimized me out of the family." "Sophia, do not start," she sighed, finally turning to look at me with weary eyes. "You have been gone for years. We hardly know what you look like anymore. Andre and Brad are here every weekend. They support us. They are part of this life. You are visiting. Visiting. The word hung in the air like smoke. I placed the gift bag on the Marble Island countertop. I brought this for dinner. It is a thank you for letting me stay. Mom peeked into the bag. She pulled out the bottle of wine. It was a 2008 Screaming Eagle Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle that I had received from a French diplomat after a particularly tense negotiation. It retailed for about $4,000. To a connoisseur, it was liquid gold. Mom squinted at the label, frowning. She clearly did not recognize the vineyard. There was no flashy gold foil, no cursive writing that screamed expensive to the uneducated eye, just a simple, elegant label. She let out a short, dismissive puff of air. "Oh, Sophia, that is sweet. But we are serving a specific pairing tonight. Brad bought a crate of wine from his country club. It is very high-end." She pushed the $4,000 bottle toward the edge of the counter near the spice rack. "We can use this for cooking, I suppose," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I am making a bolognese sauce for lunch tomorrow. It might be good for deglazing the pan if it is not too acidic, though usually cheap wine turns the sauce bitter." I stared at her, blinking slowly. Cooking wine. She wanted to use a Screaming Eagle for pasta sauce. "Actually, Mom," I started feeling a petty need to correct her. "That bottle is—" She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Go wash up, Sophia, and please use the guest bathroom downstairs, not the master. And try to do something with your hair. It looks so severe. Brad and Andre will be back from the gym soon, and I want everyone to look presentable." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. I picked up my bag and headed toward the stairs, but she stopped me again. "Not upstairs, Sophia." I turned around. "What? My room is upstairs?" "Not anymore," she said, turning back to her flowers. "We turned your old room into a content studio for Andre. He needs space to record his sales videos and live streams. The lighting in there is the best in the house." I felt my blood pressure rising. "So where am I sleeping?" "The storage room in the basement is finished," she said breezily. "We put a nice air mattress down there. It is private. Besides, you are used to roughing it, right? With whatever lifestyle you have been living out of. That car. The basement, next to the furnace and the old Christmas decorations." "Fine," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "The basement is fine." I walked down the narrow stairs to the lower level, the air getting cooler and damper with every step. The basement was finished, technically, but it was cluttered with boxes of junk they did not want to look at but refused to throw away. In the corner, next to the noisy water heater, sat a deflated air mattress with a folded sheet on top. I dropped my bag on the concrete floor and sat down on the cold plastic of the mattress. I pulled out my secure BlackBerry from my pocket. It blinked with a red notification light. One new message from the Pentagon. Subject: Project Orion, Phase 4. Approval from General Sterling. Message: Colonel Williams, I need your eyes on the final budget assessment for Vanguard Systems before I sign off. I am coming to verify the leadership personally. I will see you tomorrow at 0800 hours. Do not blow your cover until I get there. I looked at the screen, a small smile finally touching my lips. Vanguard Systems, my father's employer, and Brad's new major client. They were begging for a government contract that would save their company from bankruptcy. A contract that was currently sitting in my inbox, waiting for my digital signature. I typed back a quick reply. Copy that, General. The leadership is unstable. See you at 0800. I lay back on the deflated mattress, staring at the exposed pipes in the ceiling. Upstairs, I heard the front door open. Booming laughter echoed through the vents. "Honey, we are home!" I heard Brad shout. "Did the stray cat make it in yet?" I closed my eyes. "Enjoy your laugh, Brad. Tomorrow you are going to choke on it." The stray cat just happens to be holding the keys to your entire future. And right now, I am feeling very, very petty. The smell of roasted garlic and rosemary pulled me out of the basement dampness and back into the reality of the house that had never felt like a home. I walked up the stairs, smoothing down the front of my simple black sweater, trying to compose my face into a mask of neutral politeness. Dinner was mandatory. My mother had made that clear through a text message sent 5 minutes ago, despite me being only 1 floor down. Do not be late, and do not wear those combat boots in my dining room. When I entered the dining room, the scene was like a Renaissance painting of betrayal. The crystal chandelier was dimmed to a warm glow, casting long shadows across the table set with the good china. The white porcelain with the gold rim that I was never allowed to touch as a child. And there sat Brad, my father's chair, the high-backed oak seat at the head of the table that had signified authority in this house for 40 years, was now occupied by my brother-in-law. My father, Marcus, sat to his right, looking diminished and small, hunched over his soup bowl like a guest in his own home. My mother, Bernice, sat opposite him, beaming at Brad as if he were the sun and she was a sunflower desperate for his. "Light, take a seat, Sophia," Brad said, gesturing with his spoon to the smallest chair usually reserved for extra guests, tucked awkwardly near the swinging kitchen door. "We waited for you, but the roast was getting cold, and you know how Andre gets when his blood sugar drops." I pulled out the chair, which scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, drawing a sharp hiss of disapproval from my mother. I sat down, keeping my hands in my lap. The table was laden with food: a prime rib roast, glazed carrots, creamy mashed potatoes, and the bottle of wine Brad had brought. The bottle of Screaming Eagle I had brought was nowhere to be seen, likely tucked away in a cabinet for cooking vinegar, just as my mother had threatened. "So, Sophia," Brad began, after swallowing a large bite of beef and wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, "we were talking about the future, specifically Andre's future. The market is tough right now, but winners always find a way. My firm just closed a deal with a major defense contractor, Vanguard Systems. Perhaps you have heard of them." I kept my face perfectly still. Vanguard Systems was the company my father worked for as a mid-level manager. It was also the company whose entire existence currently depended on the project authorization file sitting on my encrypted laptop downstairs. I took a small sip of water and nodded slowly. "I have heard of them." "Right. Well, we are positioning ourselves to handle their portfolio once they win this new government bid," Brad continued, puffing out his chest. "It is going to be massive. Millions in commissions. Andre and I are looking at upgrading to the estate lots near the country club, finally getting away from the riffraff." He paused, looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to be impressed or jealous. When I said nothing, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, a breach of etiquette my mother would have slapped my hand for, but she simply smiled at him. "But enough about us. Let's talk about you, Sophia. It has been, 3 years since you dropped off the grid. What exactly have you been doing with your life? We were worried you might be, I do not know, living in a commune or something." I sliced a small piece of roast beef, keeping my eyes on my plate. "I have been working, Brad. Just working." "Doing what exactly?" Andre chimed in, his voice high and demanding. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first apartment. "Doing what, Sophia? Because Mom said you drove up in a car that sounds like a lawnmower. Successful people do not drive beaters, so be honest with us." I set my knife and fork down softly. I work for the government. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not the silence of respect. It was the silence of confusion, followed immediately by the raucous sound of Brad's laughter. It started as a chuckle and grew into a full-bellied guffaw that made the crystal glasses vibrate. My mother covered her mouth to hide a smile, and even my father let out a short, dry cough of amusement. "The government, Brad," wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Oh, Sophia, that is rich. When you say the government, do not tell me you are one of those people at the DMV who yells at me to take a number. Or wait, let me guess. You are scanning packages at the post office, trying to make sure Grandma gets her birthday card on time." "No," Andre interrupted, smirking at his husband, watching him for cues on how to react. "I bet she is a meter maid. You know, the ones who walk around in those neon vests, putting tickets on cars because they have no real power in life. Is that it, Sophia? Are you writing parking tickets?" I felt a burning sensation in my chest, a mix of anger and pity. They were so small, so incredibly small in their worldview. To them, power was a Tesla and a country club membership. They could not comprehend that the woman sitting across from them had the authority to ground air squadrons and reallocate billions of dollars with a single phone call. "I work in logistics," I said calmly, keeping my voice even. "Helping manage resources." "Resources?" Brad scoffed. "Resources implies value, Sophia. You are probably counting pencils in a supply closet somewhere. Look, there is no shame in it. Well, actually, there is a little shame. My taxes pay your salary, so technically, I am your boss. Isn't that funny? In a way, you are working for me right now." My mother leaned in her face, arranged in a mask of faux concern. "Sophia, honey, if you are struggling, you can tell us. We know the government does not pay well, especially for entry-level positions without a college degree. We just want you to be stable." "I do have a degree, Mom," I said quietly. "I have two, actually. A master's in strategic defense and a PhD in international relations." But I did not say that out loud. Telling them would only invite more mockery, more accusations that I was lying. Instead, I just took a bite of potatoes and let them believe their own narrative. "You know," Brad said, snapping his fingers as if a brilliant idea had just struck him. "Speaking of stability, Andre and I were talking about the new office building my firm just leased downtown. It is a beautiful space. Glass walls, marble floors, very high-end. We have been having trouble with the cleaning crew lately. They keep missing spots in the executive bathroom." Andre clapped his hands together, delight spreading across his face. "Oh my God, Brad, that is a genius idea. Sophia, listen to this. Brad can pull some strings. He is very close with the building management. If you need extra cash, we can get you on the night shift cleaning crew. It is quiet work, you would not have to talk to anyone, which suits your personality, and honestly, it probably pays better than whatever you are doing for the government. Plus, you could clean my office. I would make sure to leave a nice tip." The table erupted in laughter again. Brad slapped Andre on the back, congratulating him on his wit. My father finally spoke up, his voice gruff. "Sophia, you should listen to them. It is a generous offer. You cannot drive that junk car forever. You need to start building a future, even if it is starting at the bottom. At your age, you cannot afford to be proud." I looked at my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who was now looking at me with nothing but disappointment and shame. He was worried about his own job at Vanguard, terrified of the impending layoffs if the contract did not go through. He had no idea that the daughter he was encouraging to scrub toilets was the only thing standing between him and the unemployment line. I looked at Brad, seeing the cruelty dancing in his eyes. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed reducing me to a caricature of failure because it made him feel taller. It validated his debt-driven lifestyle, his hollow success. I picked up my wine glass, swirling the water inside. "Thank you for the offer, Andre," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was dangerously low, barely above a whisper. "But I think I will stick with my current position. The benefits are quite good." Brad rolled his eyes, leaning back in my father's "suit yourself. But do not come crying to us when the government shuts down and you are out on the street." "We tried to help Bernice. You saw us try, right?" "We are saints, honestly." As they turned back to their roast beef discussing the merits of the wine, I allowed myself a moment of internal retreat. My mind flashed back to this morning at the Pentagon, the war room. A massive table much larger than this one, surrounded by generals and admirals. The air conditioning humming over the silence as I stood at the head of the table, holding the heavy black stylus over the digital tablet. The Vanguard Systems proposal was on the screen. $2 billion for the next generation missile guidance system. General Sterling had looked at me, his eyebrows raised, asking for my verdict. "The financials are shaky, General," I had said, my voice echoing in the secure room. "The CFO seems to be leveraging company assets for personal real estate investments. The numbers do not add up. I cannot sign off on this until I verify the leadership integrity, hold the contract Colonel Sterling had ordered. Go to the source. Find out if they are incompetent or just corrupt." I looked at Brad, now wiping grease from his chin, laughing at his own joke about poor people. I looked at my father, terrified and weak. And I looked at Andre, spoiled and oblivious. I am not the janitor, I thought, as I sliced through the meat on my plate with surgical precision. I am the executioner. And tomorrow morning, when the sun comes up and General Sterling walks through that door, I am going to drop the guillotine on this entire charade. Enjoy the wine, Brad. It is the last expensive thing you will taste for a very long time. The next afternoon, the backyard had been transformed into a stage for my parents' social ambitions. The scent of hickory smoke and expensive perfume hung heavy in the humid Virginia air. My mother had invited the neighbors, specifically the Davises, a wealthy white couple who lived in the mansion next door, along with a few of Brad's business associates from the country club. It was a carefully curated audience, designed to showcase just how successful the Williams family had become. I stood near the patio door, holding a tray of iced tea, watching the performance unfold. My father, Marcus, was holding court by the high-end grill, a glass of scotch in one hand and a pair of tongs in the other. He was laughing a little too loudly at a joke Mr. Davis had made, trying desperately to bridge the gap between being a neighbor and being an equal. "And this is my son-in-law, Brad," my father announced, gesturing with the tongs toward the patio table where Brad was holding court. Brad was wearing a crisp white polo shirt and boat shoes, looking every inch the relaxed, successful financier. He had his arm draped casually around Andre, who was beaming, soaking up the proximity to power. "Brad is the reason we are looking at retiring early," my father continued, his voice filled with pride. "He is finalizing a massive deal with Vanguard Systems. Honestly, the boy is a wizard with numbers. We are just so blessed that Andre found someone with such ambition." Mrs. Davis, a woman with hair sprayed into an immobile helmet of blonde, turned her gaze toward me. I was wearing a simple pair of jeans and a gray t-shirt, standing apart from the group, looking like I had wandered into the wrong party. "And is that your daughter?" Mrs. Davis asked, tilting her head. "I do not think we have been formally introduced." My stomach tightened. I braced myself for the truth. for him to say that I worked for the government, or even that I was just visiting. But my father did not even look at me when he answered. "Oh, that is Sophia," he said, his voice dropping to a tone of performative sympathy. "She is staying with us for a while, getting back on her feet. She is going through a very messy divorce, actually quite tragic." I nearly dropped the tray. A divorce? I had never been married. I had been married to the United States Air Force for the last 15 years, sacrificing relationships and stability for service. But to my father, a divorce was a more acceptable explanation for my lack of a husband than the truth. It painted me as a victim, a woman who had failed at the one thing my mother deemed important, keeping a man. "Oh, you poor dear," Mrs. Davis cooed, looking at me with pity that felt like a slap. "It must be so hard starting over at your age, taking handouts from your parents." I opened my mouth to correct her, to tell her that I owned a condo in D.C., paid for in cash, and that my rank carried more weight than her husband's entire portfolio. But before I could speak, Brad cut in. "Yeah, we're just trying to keep her busy," Brad said loudly, grabbing a ribs from the platter. "Keep her mind off her failures, right, Sophia? Idleness is the devil's workshop and all that." The group laughed, a polite ripple of amusement at my expense. I gripped the cold metal of the tray tighter, feeling the condensation run down my fingers. My internal training kicked in. The discipline that stopped me from snapping the neck of an enemy combatant was the only thing stopping me from dumping the iced tea over Brad's head. I walked over to the table and set the tray down, intending to retreat back to the safety of the basement. But Brad was not done with me yet. He was enjoying the audience. He loved having a prop to elevate his own status. He took a bite of the rib, the barbecue sauce thick and red, dripping from the meat. As he chewed, talking with his mouth full about market volatility, a globs of sauce fell from his lip and landed squarely on the chest of his white polo shirt. "Damn it," Brad cursed, looking down at the stain. "This is Ralph Lauren." He looked up, and his eyes locked onto mine. The smirk returned. "Sophia," he snapped, snapping his fingers as if summoning a waiter. "Grab some club soda and a towel, would you? And get this stain out for me before it sets. You are standing right there. Do something useful for once." The conversation around us stopped. The Davises looked uncomfortable, interested, watching the family dynamic play out. My father looked nervous, but he did not intervene. He just watched, waiting for me to obey. I stood completely still. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree. I looked at Brad, a man who had never served a day in his life, a man who stole from his father-in-law and belittled his wife, ordering me a colonel to do his laundry in front of strangers. The disrespect was absolute. It was not just about the shirt. It was a power play, a test to see if I was truly broken. I picked up a cloth napkin from the table. It was damp from the condensation of the water pitcher. Brad leaned forward, lifting his chin, expecting me to dab at his chest like a servant. I took a step forward, my movements fluid and precise. Instead of dabbing the stain, I tossed the damp napkin. It flew through the air and landed with a wet, heavy thud directly on his face, covering his eyes and nose. "Clean it yourself, Brad," I said, my voice low but carrying perfectly across the silent patio. Turned on my heel and walked toward the sliding glass door. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally pushing back. Behind me, I heard the napkin fall to the ground and Brad's sputtered outrage. "You see?" my father hissed to the guests, apologizing profusely. "She is unstable. The divorce really broke her mind." I am so sorry, everyone. I walked into the kitchen and leaned against the granite island, taking a deep breath. They thought I was unstable. They thought I was broken. Let them think that. It would make the surprise so much sweeter when I broke their world apart. Tomorrow, the barbecue continued outside, the laughter returning, but the line had been drawn. The war had officially begun, and I was done being a casualty. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the kitchen, but it brought no warmth to the frozen atmosphere around the breakfast table. Andre was sitting at the island, his head in his hands, sobbing theatrically, while my mother rubbed his back, cooing soft words of comfort. The center of the crisis was a stack of credit card statements spread out on the granite countertop like autopsy photos of a financial disaster. $30,000 in debt, accumulated in less than 3 months. It was for the brand, Andre choked out, lifting his tear-stained face to look at my father. I had to look successful to attract high-ticket clients. Dad, you understand, right? The suits, the camera lenses, the business lunches. It was an investment. My father. Marcus sighed heavily, leaning against the refrigerator, rubbing his temples. He looked aged and tired, the stress of the impending Vanguard deal clearly weighing on him. But instead of disciplining his 34-year-old son for reckless spending, he turned his gaze toward me. I was standing by the coffee machine, quietly brewing a cup of black coffee, trying to make myself invisible. $30,000, my father repeated. Then he looked at Brad, who was pacing the kitchen floor, checking his watch. Brad stopped pacing and fixed me with a glare that could peel paint. "This is a disaster," Brad hissed. "If this debt hits the credit bureaus, it tanks Andre's score. Since we are co-signers on the Tesla and the house lease, it hits my score too. Do you know what happens if my credit score drops below 700, Sophia? The Vanguard background check fails. I lose the contract. We lose everything." The room fell silent, except for the bubbling of the coffee pot. Then, as if rehearsed, 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. Sophia, my mother, began, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "You have savings, right? You have been working all these years, living out of your car, having no expenses. You must have a nest egg." I gripped my coffee mug, feeling the heat against my palms. "I have savings, Mom, but that is for my retirement. It is for the house I am building. It is not for bailing Andre out of a shopping spree." My mother's face hardened instantly. "Oh, stop it, Sophia. You are single. You have no husband, no children to provide for. What do you need money for, really? You are just hoarding it while your brother is drowning. It is selfish." I felt a spark of rage ignite in my chest. "Selfish?" I asked, turning to face them. "I have been on my own since I was 23. I have never asked you for a dime. Andre is a grown man. If he wants to play business tycoon, he needs to pay for it." My father slammed his hand down on the island, the sound cracking like a whip. "Shut up, Sophia! Just shut up!" He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You ungrateful child. We put a roof over your head this weekend. We fed you, and this is how you repay us. By watching your brother ruin his life over a meaningless sum of money." "Meaningless?" I laughed bitterly. "If it is meaningless, why don't you pay it, Dad?" "Because my liquidity is tied up in the company's stock until the merger happens," Brad cut in, stepping into my personal space, looming over me, using his height to intimidate. "You are the only one with cash on here. Hand Sophia. And you are going to give it to us. Because if I lose this security clearance because of bad credit, I will make sure you never step foot in this house again." He pulled a folded document from his briefcase. It was a loan agreement, but not a standard one. I glanced at the text. It was a promissory note transferring $30,000 from my personal account to a joint account held by Brad and Andre, effectively labeling it as a gift with no legal requirement for repayment. "Sign it," Brad commanded, sliding a pen across the counter. "Transfer the funds by noon." I looked at the document, then at my family. My mother looked expectant, my father looked angry, and Andre looked smug, wiping his eyes, knowing he had won once again. They were not asking. They were looting. They saw me as nothing more than a resource to be harvested, a piggy bank to be smashed open so the golden child could keep playing pretend. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch. I reached into the pocket of my jeans, but I did not reach for my phone. I reached for my own pen. It was a sleek silver ballpoint, standard issue for field operatives working in hostile territories. The ink inside was a chemically unstable compound designed to oxidize and vanish completely within 48 hours of contact with paper, leaving no trace that a signature ever existed. I picked up the document, my face a mask of defeat. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice trembling slightly just to sell the performance. "I will do it. But this is the last time. Do not ask me for anything else." I uncapped my silver pen and pressed the tip to the paper. The ink flowed dark and permanent-looking. I signed my name, Sophia Williams, with a flourish right on the bottom line. My mother let out a breath of relief, clapping her hands together. "Thank you, Jesus." She rushed over to hug Andre. "See, baby? I told you it would work out. Your sister finally did the right thing." Brad snatched the paper from under my hand, checking the signature. He smirked, rolling the pen, document up and tapping it against his palm. "Smart choice, Sophia. You just bought yourself a ticket to stay for dinner tonight. Now go to the bank and wire the funds. I want to see the confirmation number before lunch." I capped my pen and slipped it back into my pocket. "I will handle the transfer," I said, turning back to my coffee. "I just need to make a call to authorize it." As I walked out of the kitchen heading back down to the basement, I heard them celebrating. Andre was already talking about a new lens he needed for his camera. My father was pouring more coffee, the tension leaving his shoulders. They had no idea. The document I just signed would be a blank sheet of paper by the time the auditors looked at it. And the transfer I was about to authorize was not $30,000 to their account. It was a transfer of evidence, sending the audio recording of this entire extortion attempt directly to the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Blackmail was a felony, and they had just handed me the smoking gun on a silver platter. I reached the safety of the basement and sat down on the air mattress listening to their footsteps above me. They thought they had squeezed the last drop of blood from the stone. They thought they had broken me, but all they had done was sign their own confession. And tomorrow, when the ink faded, so would their future. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the living room floor, where my father had set up a makeshift workspace. The dining table was covered in blueprints and thick binders stamped with the Vanguard Systems logo and bold red letters that read, "Confidential, proprietary information." I was walking through the room on my way to the kitchen to refill my water bottle when I saw it. My father was in the backyard, arguing on the phone with a supplier, leaving the documents unattended. A breach of protocol so severe that if I were in my office at the Pentagon, I would have had his security clearance revoked immediately. But what caught my eye was not just the carelessness, It was the schematic lying open on top of the pile. It was the design for the primary thruster assembly of the Orion missile system, the very system I was responsible for evaluating. I stopped and leaned in closer, squinting at the complex web of lines and calculations. My eyes traced the fuel flow regulator valve, and then I saw it. A calculation error in the pressure variance formula. It was subtle, a misplaced decimal in the stress tolerance load, but it was fatal. If built this way, the thruster would explode upon ignition, destroying the payload and potentially the launch site. Without thinking, my instincts took over. I reached for a red pencil lying on the table. With a steady hand, I circled the error and wrote the correct formula in the margin, specifically noting the required alloy density to handle the pressure. It was reflex, pure and simple, correcting a mistake that could cost lives. "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" The voice boomed from the hallway, startling me. I looked up to see Brad storming into the room, his face twisted in a mixture of horror and rage. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides and snatched the pencil from my hand, throwing it across the room. "Get away from there!" he shouted, positioning himself between me and the table as if he were guarding the crown jewels. "Are you insane, Sophia? This is top secret, classified government property. You do not just doodle on it like it is a coloring book." I stood my ground, keeping my expression calm. "Brad, that schematic has a critical flaw in the pressure valve. You were just, what?" Brad interrupted, his voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You were just ruining a multi-million-dollar proposal with your ignorance. Do you have any idea how complex this engineering is? This is rocket science, Sophia. Literally, rocket science. Not whatever basic arithmetic you use to count change at your job." My father rushed in from the backyard, phone still in hand, looking panicked. "What is going on?" I heard shouting. "Dad, look at this." Brad pointed an accusing finger at me. "She was writing on the master blueprints, the Orion schematics. She defaced them." My father's face went pale. He dropped his phone on the sofa and rushed to the table, looking at the red markings I had made. He looked at the formula I had written, a complex differential equation that solved the overheating issue. And then he looked at me with pure disgust. He did not see the solution. He only saw the red mark of disobedience. "Sophia," my father whispered, his voice shaking with anger. "Do you know what you have done? This is the master copy. We are presenting this to General Sterling tomorrow. Do you know how much it costs to print these secure documents?" "Dad, listen to me," I tried to interject, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "The fuel regulator is calibrated for the wrong atmospheric density. If you build it like that, the engine will fail." I corrected the math. "You corrected the math?" my father repeated, mocking me. "You barely passed high school physics, Sophia. You have been unemployed for years, living out of a car, and now you think you know more than the top engineers at Vanguard Systems?" He grabbed the blueprint, the paper crinkling in his fist, and ripped the page right down the middle, right through the solution I had provided. "You stupid girl," he spat, throwing the torn pieces into the trash can by the door. "You just cost me hours of work. I have to tape this back together and pray the scanner can fix it before the meeting. Get out. Get out of my sight before I lose my temper completely." Brad was smirking behind him, enjoying the show. "I told you, Marcus. She is jealous. She wants to sabotage you because she cannot stand seeing us succeed. It is pathetic, really." I looked at the torn paper in the trash can. The only viable solution to their engineering problem was now sitting among the coffee grounds and old receipts. My father had literally thrown away his victory. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my shirt. "I was just trying to help Dad," I said quietly. "Help!" my father scoffed, turning his back on me to frantically examine the rest of the documents. "You want to help? Go clean the bathroom. Go scrub the floors. Do something that fits your skill set and stay away from this table. If I catch you near these papers again, I will kick you out of this house tonight, family or not." I walked away, my footsteps silent on the carpet. As I headed back toward the basement stairs, I could hear Brad reassuring my father. "Don't worry, Marcus. I will double-check everything. We do not need her scribble. The engineers know what they are doing. She is just looking for attention." I closed the basement door behind me, shutting out their voices. I sat down on the edge of the air mattress and stared at the concrete wall. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. My father had just torn up the only thing that could have saved his career. The engineers at Vanguard were good, but they were overworked, and under pressure, they had missed that decimal point. I had seen it because I had spent the last 10 years studying every failure and success in ballistics technology. I reached for my secure phone but stopped myself. No. I would not call Captain Miller to fix this for them. Let them present the flawed design. Let General Sterling see exactly what kind of incompetence Vanguard Systems was bringing to the table. My father thought he was protecting his work from a failure. In reality, he had just ensured it. Tomorrow, when he unrolled that taped-up schematic in front of the general, he would be presenting a bomb. And he would have no one to blame but himself. I lay back on the pillow, listening to the muffled sounds of them taping the paper back together upstairs, hoping they could hide the red marks. I closed my eyes and visualized the explosion that would happen in the conference room tomorrow. Not a literal fire, but the destruction of their egos. It was going to be spectacular. And for the first time since arriving, I felt a sense of peace. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it, dragging me along as the witness to their own demise. The evening air in the house was stifling, thick with the tension that had been brewing since the blueprint incident. I retreated to the living room, hoping to find my purse and disappear back into the basement. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. Brad was standing by the coffee table, and he had my canvas duffel bag open. He was rifling through it, his hands digging past my folded clothes and my toiletries kit with zero respect for my privacy. My heart hammered against my ribs, not out of fear, but out of a sharp, protective instinct deeper than anger. That bag had been with me in Kabul. It had sat on the floor of transport planes and Humvees. It contained the few personal items I held sacred. "What do you think you are doing?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet of the room. Brad jumped slightly, but he recovered instantly, pulling his hand out of the bag. He was holding my wallet. He didn't look guilty. Instead, he looked annoyed, as if I had inconvenienced him by catching him in the act. "I was looking for cash," Brad said, shrugging his shoulders as he flipped my wallet open. "I need to tip the delivery driver for the pizza we ordered, and I only have hundreds. I figured, since we are letting you stay here for free, the least you could do is contribute a few singles." He began pulling cards out of the slots, tossing my library card and my Metro Pass onto the table with a sneer. Then he froze. His fingers stopped on a plain white card tucked in the back flap. It was my common access card, my CAC, the standard issue identification for Department of Defense personnel. To a civilian, it looks unimpressive, just a white plastic card with a small photo, a smart chip, and a lot of barcodes. It does not look like a movie prop. It looks bureaucratic. Brad pulled it out, holding it up to the light like he was inspecting a counterfeit bill. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Well, 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 he chuckled, turning the card over in his fingers. What do we have here? Department of Defense, United States Air Force. He looked at the photo, then at me, then back at the card, pushing a laugh through his nose. This is cute, Sophia. Really cute. Put it back, Brad, I said, stepping forward. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides. That is government property. Government property, he mocked, stepping back just out of my reach. You mean this little piece of plastic? You printed this at home, didn't you? I have seen these online. People buy them to get 10% off at Home Depot or to get free checked bags at the airport. He walked over to my mother, who was sitting on the sofa, flipping through a magazine. Look at this, Bernice. Your daughter is not just a failure, she is a fraud. She is walking around with a fake military ID, pretending to be an officer. Look, it says rank colonel. That stands for colonel, right? My mother glanced at the card and sighed, shaking her head. Oh, Sophia, I knew you were desperate for attention, but this is a new low. Stolen valor? Is that what they call it? Pretending to be a soldier when you are not? It is disrespectful to the real heroes, like Brad's father, who served in the reserves. I felt the blood pulsing in my ears. They were so confident in their ignorance, so arrogant in their assessment of my worth. They looked at a colonel and saw a con artist, because their worldview could not accept a reality where I was successful. Give me the card, Brad, I said, my voice dropping to a command tone I did not use often with civilians. That is a federal identification credential. You are unauthorized to handle it. Unauthorized? He mimicked, making a scared face. You are going to arrest me, Sophia? With what? Your imaginary army? He looked at the card again, his expression turning dark. You know this is actually a crime, right? Impersonating an officer? If you get pulled over and a cop sees this, you could go to jail. I am actually worried about you. This is delusional behavior. He walked over to the desk where my father kept his office supplies. He picked up a pair of heavy-duty shears, the kind used for cutting thick paper or fabric. I am going to do you a favor, he said, opening the blades of the scissors. The metal made a sharp, rasping sound that set my teeth on edge. I am going to save you from yourself. If the neighbors saw this, they would call the police. We cannot have a felon living under our roof. It would ruin the Vanguard background check. No, I said, stepping forward, but I was too late. Brad slid the smart chip of my ID between the blades of the scissors and squeezed. There was a sickening crunch as the plastic snapped. The chip, the encrypted microprocessor that held my security clearance, my medical records, and my access codes to the Pentagon, shattered into useless shards. Brad didn't stop there. He cut the card in half vertically, right through my photograph, and then in half again, dropping the pieces onto the carpet like confetti. There, he said, dusting his hands off, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Problem solved. Now you cannot use it to scam anyone. You should thank me, Sophia. I just kept you out of federal prison. I stood there, looking down at the white fragments on the Persian rug. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Time slowed down. In his arrogance, Brad had not just insulted me. He had committed a felony under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1361, Destruction of Government Property, and Section 701, Unauthorized Possession of Official Badges. He had destroyed a credential that belonged to the Department of Defense, not to me. I looked up at him. My face was completely devoid of emotion. I felt a cold calm settle over me. the kind of calm that comes before a drone strike. "You think you are smart, Brad?" I asked quietly. My voice was so soft, he had to lean in to hear me. "You think you just saved the family reputation." "I did," he said, puffing out his chest, tossing the scissors back onto the desk. "You are welcome." I nodded slowly, looking him dead in the eyes. I wasn't looking at a family member anymore. I was looking at a target. "You just destroyed a smart card issued by the United States Department of Defense," I said, articulating every syllable. "That chip you just crushed contained top-secret encryption keys. Do you know what the penalty is for destroying federal property and interfering with an active duty officer?" Brad laughed, waving his hand dismissively. "Stop it, Sophia. The act is over. I cut the card. You can stop pretending." "I am not pretending, Brad," I whispered. I leaned in closer so only he could hear the steel in my voice. "And you didn't save me from prison. You just booked your own reservation. You have no idea what you just did. But I promise you, by this time tomorrow, you are going to wish you had just taken the cash and walked away." I bent down and picked up the pieces of my ID carefully, collecting every shard of the microchip. I wrapped them in a tissue and placed them in my pocket as evidence. My mother watched me with disdain, thinking I was picking up trash. Brad snorted, turning back to the TV. "You are dramatic, Sophia. Go back to the basement and take your bag with you before I check it for more fake toys." I picked up my bag and zipped it shut, the sound echoing like a zipper on a body bag. I looked at the back of Brad's head, at his relaxed posture, his absolute certainty that he was the alpha in the room. He had just declared war on the United States military, and he didn't even know it. I walked toward the basement door, my hand brushing against the pocket where the broken ID lay. Tonight I would file the report. Tomorrow he would answer for it. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house shifted from passive aggression to full-blown panic. It started with a phone call at 7 in the morning. My father answered it in the kitchen, dropping a carton of eggs in the process. The yolk splattered across the tile floor, but he did not even notice. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray as he stammered into the receiver. "Yes, General. Of course, General. We would be honored, absolutely honored. 7 o'clock implies perfect." He hung up the phone and looked at us like he had just seen a ghost. "General Sterling is coming here. Tonight. Personally. Before the signing ceremony tomorrow. He wants to have a private, informal dinner with the key stakeholders to gauge our family values." Chaos erupted instantly. It was a frenzy of superficial perfectionism. My mother, Bernice, began screaming orders like a drill sergeant, but without the tactical logic. She made Andre hide all his gaming equipment in the attic, claiming it looked childish. She ordered the landscapers to come back and recut the grass, which had been cut yesterday, because she saw a single dandelion near the mailbox. Brad took charge of the wine selection, pacing back and forth in the living room, reciting facts about tannins and regions that I knew he had just memorized from Wikipedia. He was desperate to appear sophisticated, to look like the kind of financial genius a 4-star general would trust with a billion-dollar portfolio. I stood in the corner drinking my coffee, watching them scramble. They were polishing silver that was already clean and dusting surfaces that had no dust. It was a performance, a theater production, designed to hide the rot at the core of this family. They wanted to present an image of unity and success, when in reality, they were drowning in debt and deceit. By noon, the house smelled of lemon polish and desperation. My father called a family meeting in the living room. We all gathered around the coffee table. Brad sat in the center, looking serious, as if he were about to brief the cabinet on a national security crisis. "We have a logistical problem," Brad announced, clasping his hands together and looking directly at me. "The general is a man of class, a man of extreme standards, Marcus tells me. He values discipline and success above all else." He paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the blow. "Sophia, you cannot sit at the table tonight." I blinked, not surprised, but still stung by the audacity. "Why exactly can I not eat dinner in my own parents' house?" "Because, look at you." Brad gestured vaguely at my entire existence. "You are unemployed, you are driving a car that looks like it survived a demolition derby, and you have the demeanor of someone who has given up on life. If the general sees you sitting there with us, asking about your non-existent career, it drags us all down. It devalues the brand we are trying to sell." My mother nodded nervously, wringing her hands. Calling it a brand felt cold, but she went along with it. "He is right, honey. The general might ask awkward questions. He might ask why a woman of your age is single and drifting. It reflects poorly on your father's leadership. If he cannot manage his own daughter, how can he manage a defense contract?" I felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in my throat. My father's leadership was the reason I left home at 18. The general knew exactly who I was. He knew my rank, my clearance, and my combat history. But to tell them now would ruin the trap. I had to play the long game. "So what do you want me to do?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "Go to a hotel." "No," Brad said quickly. "We cannot risk you running into him in the driveway on your way out. Plus, we need help. The catering service canceled last minute because Bernice yelled at them about the deposit." He reached into a shopping bag that was sitting by his feet and pulled out a black fabric bundle. He tossed it to me. It landed in my lap with a soft thud. I unfolded it. It was a uniform. A black dress with a white apron and a white collar. The kind of thing a maid would wear in a bad movie or high-end catering staff would wear to be invisible. "You will serve tonight," Brad said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You will stay in the kitchen. You will bring out the courses, refill the wine, and clear the plates. And you will not speak unless spoken to. If the general acknowledges you, you will just say, 'Yes, sir,' and move on. Do not try to engage him in conversation. Do not try to be charming. Just be invisible." I looked at the uniform in my hands. It was cheap polyester, rough against my fingertips. This was their solution: to turn the colonel into the help, to strip away my identity completely so I would not tarnish their shiny, fake lives. My father looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "Just do it, Sophia, please. For the family. If this contract goes through, I can pay off the house. We can finally be secure. Just help us this one time. Help us." It was always about helping them, even if it meant erasing me. I stood up, clutching the uniform. "Fine," I said. "I will wear it. I will serve dinner." Brad smirked, leaning back in the sofa. "Glad we are on the same page. Make sure you iron that apron. I do not want any wrinkles when you are pouring the general's water." I turned and walked back down to the basement, carrying the symbol of my humiliation. But as I descended stairs, my mind was racing. General Sterling was not a man who cared about fancy wine or manicured lawns. He was a soldier, a warrior who respected grit and integrity. He had seen me covered in mud and blood in the trenches of Kandahar. He had pinned the silver star on my chest. When he walked in tonight and saw his program executive officer, the woman who controlled the fate of this entire contract, wearing a maid uniform and pouring wine for a thief like Brad, the explosion would be nuclear. I put on the dress, zip it up the back. It was tight and uncomfortable. I tied the white apron around my waist, looking at myself in the cracked mirror in the basement corner. I did not look like a maid. I looked like an undercover operative deep in enemy territory. I checked my watch. 6 hours until dinner. 6 hours until the curtain dropped on their little play. I sat on the edge of the air mattress and waited, listening to them rehearse their lies upstairs, preparing to serve them the coldest dish of all. Revenge. Here, put this on. And for heaven's sake, try to fix your hair before you come upstairs. The bundle of black fabric hit my chest with a dull thud before falling to the concrete floor. My mother stood at the top of the basement stairs, her silhouette framed by the light from the hallway, looking down at me like a warden inspecting an inmate. She did not wait for a response. She simply turned on her heel and slammed the door shut, leaving me alone in the damp silence of the cellar. I reached down and picked up the uniform. It was cheap polyester, the kind that traps sweat and itches against the skin. It smelled of mothballs and old cedar, a scent that instantly transported me back to high school theater productions, expecting me to play a role in their fantasy life, quite literally. I stripped off my jeans and my comfortable gray shirt, shivering slightly as the cool basement air hit my skin. I stepped into the black dress, pulling it up over my hips. It was tight in the shoulders, restricting my movement, a physical reminder of how they were trying to constrain me. I zipped it up, feeling the cheap metal teeth bite into my skin. The apron came next, a crisp white piece of fabric that tied around my waist, marking me as the help, the servant, the invisible labor that would make them look good. I walked over to the cracked mirror that was leaning against the water heater. It was dusted with grime, but I could see myself clearly enough. The woman staring back at me looked defeated. Her shoulders were slumped in the ill-fitting dress, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, just as Brad had requested. She looked like Sophia, the failure. Sophia, the charity case. Sophia, who needed to be hidden away in the kitchen. I stared into my own eyes in the reflection, and for a moment, the basement walls seemed to dissolve. The smell of mildew and mothballs vanished, replaced by the stinging scent of jet fuel and burning sand. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. Kandahar Airfield, 2 years ago. Heat was oppressive, a physical weight that pressed down on your lungs like a heavy blanket. I was standing on the tarmac, the wind whipping my desert camouflage uniform against my body. The roar of C-17 transport planes taking off was deafening, a symphony of raw power that shook the ground beneath my boots. In the memory, I was not wearing a maid uniform. I was wearing full combat rattle body armor, weighing 30 pounds, an M4 carbine slung across my chest, and the silver eagle insignia of a colonel on my collar. I stood tall, surrounded by 2,000 Marines and airmen. I remembered the feeling of absolute clarity as I briefed the squadron commanders on the extraction mission. I remembered the way seasoned warfighters, men twice my size, looked at me. Not with pity, not with contempt, but with absolute, unwavering respect. When I spoke, they listened. When I gave an order, they moved without hesitation. "Colonel Williams on deck!" a sergeant had shouted, and the entire room had snapped to attention. A sea of salutes, crisp and synchronized. "Ma'am, the drop zone is hot," a pilot had told me, his voice crackling over the radio. "Hold the line, Captain," I had replied, my voice steady amidst the chaos. "I am routing air support to your vector. Now hold the line." I opened my eyes. snapping back to the present. The tarmac was gone. The roar of the jets was replaced by the dripping of a leaky pipe in the corner. The heavy armor was gone, replaced by the flimsy polyester of a maid's dress. The contrast was so sharp it almost made me laugh out loud. Upstairs, my brother-in-law Brad was worried I would embarrass him by dropping a fork. In the real world, I held the authority to drop a payload that could level a city block. And yet here I was, playing dress-up to soothe their fragile egos. But the woman in the mirror changed as I looked at her. The slumped shoulders straightened, the chin lifted. The eyes that had looked defeated a moment ago now burned with a cold, calculated intensity. I was not Sophia the maid. I was Colonel Sophia Williams, operating deep undercover in hostile territory. And this uniform, it was not a symbol of my submission. It was my camouflage. I walked over to my duffel bag and reached into the hidden lining. My fingers brushed against a small, hard case. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a tiny flesh-colored device no larger than a grain of rice. It was a sub-vocal communications earpiece, encrypted on a frequency that did not exist on civilian bands. I inserted the device into my right ear. It was practically invisible, vanishing into the canal. I tapped it once to activate it, hearing the familiar low hum of the connection establishing. The link was live. "Eagle is in position," I whispered. My lips barely moved, but the sensitive microphone picked up the vibration from my jawbone. A split second later, a voice responded in my ear, crystal clear and reassuring. It was Special Agent Miller from the Diplomatic Security Service, the lead on my protection. "Detail. Copy that, Eagle. We have eyes on the perimeter. The target vehicle is 5 minutes out. General Sterling is in the lead car. We have secured the perimeter of the house. Your father just walked out to the driveway, looking very nervous." "Hold position, Miller," I said, smoothing down the white apron with my hands. "Let the general enter. Let the dinner proceed. I want full surveillance on the dining room audio. If Brad or my father admits to the financial fraud, I want it recorded on the official transcript." "Understood, ma'am. And Colonel?" "Go ahead, Miller. If they cross the line, if they touch you or threaten you again, give the word. We will breach the door and extract you within 10 seconds. "Negative," I said, a small, dangerous smile playing on my lips. I want to see this through. I want to see their faces when the card turns. "Stand down until my signal." "Copy that, Eagle. Standing by." I stood up straight, adjusting the collar of my uniform. I took one last look in the mirror. The maid was gone. The predator. I was awake. I turned and walked toward the stairs, my footsteps silent and deliberate. Upstairs, I could hear the commotion of my family getting ready, the clinking of glasses, the frantic whispers. They were preparing for the most important night of their lives, expecting to impress a general. They had no idea that the real commander was already in the house, walking up the stairs to pour their wine and end their careers. I placed my hand on the doorknob, taking a deep breath. "Showtime," I whispered. I opened the door and stepped into the light, ready to serve. At exactly 1900 hours, the gravel of our driveway crunched under the weight of authority. The sound was distinct, heavy, and precise, unlike the revving engine of Brad's Tesla or the rattle of my old Ford. 3 black government-issued SUVs rolled into view, moving in a tight tactical formation that made the manicured suburban street look suddenly like a diplomatic war zone. I stood behind the kitchen door, peering through the crack, watching my family crumble before the first car door even opened. My father, Marcus, was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that was already damp. He looked less like a corporate executive and more like a man facing a firing squad. My mother, Bernice, was fluttering around him, picking invisible lint off his jacket, her smile fixed and brittle enough to snap in a strong wind. Then there was Brad. He stood slightly in front of my father, puffing out his chest, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror one last time. He adjusted his tie, a silk monstrosity that cost more than a month's rent for most people, and assumed what he thought was a power stance, legs apart, hands clasped behind his back. He looked ridiculous. A pretender about to meet a king. The lead SUV's door opened, and a security detail stepped out, scanning the perimeter with professional indifference. Then the middle car opened, and General Sterling emerged. Even from the kitchen, I felt the shift in atmospheric pressure. General Sterling was a man carved from granite. He was in his full-service dress uniform, the deep blue, impeccable. The ribbons on his chest telling a story of 30 years of combat and command. The 4 silver stars on his shoulder caught the porch light, gleaming with a cold, hard brilliance. He did not just walk. He advanced. My father rushed forward, bowing slightly, a gesture of subservience that made my stomach turn. General Sterling, welcome to our humble home. We are so honored, truly honored that you could make time for us. Sterling stopped looking at my father with eyes that could read satellite imagery. Marcus, good to see you, he said, his voice a low rumble that carried effortless authority. Brad stepped in then, unable to wait a second longer, eager to steal the spotlight. He thrust his hand out, flashing his salesman smile. General Sterling, I am Brad Evans, the financial advisor for the Vanguard portfolio. I believe we have spoken on the phone regarding the asset allocation strategy. It is a pleasure to finally meet the man behind the legend I watched closely, waiting for the handshake. The validation Brad craved so desperately. General Sterling looked at Brad's extended hand, then looked up at his face. He did not smile. He did not reach out. He simply nodded once, a microscopic acknowledgement that dismissed Brad's existence entirely before turning back to my father. Shall we go inside, Marcus? The air out here is a bit stifling. Brad's hand was left hanging in the midair, a dead fish of a gesture. He slowly lowered it, his face flushing, a deep crimson anger flashing in his eyes before he masked it with a tight fake smile. He had been ignored completely, treated like part of the landscaping. I retreated from the door, moving back to the island where the tray of wine glasses waited. My heart was beating a steady rhythm, not of fear, but of anticipation. The general was inside. The wolf was in the hen house, and the hens were too busy clucking to notice. I heard their footsteps echoing in the foyer, the heavy bootfalls of the general contrasting with the nervous shuffling of my parents. Your home is lovely, Mrs. Williams, the general said, his tone polite but distant. It is very quiet. Oh, thank you, General, my mother chirped, her voice an octave higher than normal. We try to keep a peaceful environment. Discipline and order, that is our motto. Discipline, Sterling repeated. I admire that. Tell me, Marcus, I recall from your personnel file that you have 2 children, a son and a daughter. Is the whole family in attendance tonight? I prefer to know exactly who I am breaking bread with. I froze, my hand hovering over the bottle of vintage Bordeaux. This was it, the moment of truth. My father stammered, clearing his throat. Yes, General, absolutely. My son Andre is here somewhere, probably checking the lighting in the dining room. He is very detail-oriented. And the daughter? Sterling pressed, knowing full well I was the one who had sent him the encryption keys to the evidence. File. There was a pause. A silence that stretched so thin it vibrated. My mother's voice filled the void, rushing and breathless. "Oh yes, Sophia. She is here. She is in the kitchen, actually helping with the service." "Helping?" Sterling asked, his tone sharpening slightly. "Does she not join you for dinner?" My mother let out a nervous little laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Oh no, General. Sophia is a bit... well, she is different. She has had a very hard time in life, struggling to find her footing. She is a little slow, if you understand my meaning. She prefers the background. The complexity of adult conversation can be overwhelming for her, so we find it best to give her simple tasks. It keeps her calm." I gripped the neck of the wine bottle so hard, I thought the glass might shatter simply from the force of my rage. Slow, overwhelming, simple tasks. She had just described a colonel in the United States Air Force, a woman with a PhD and top-secret clearance as a mental invalid to save her own social standing. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly through my nose. This was good. This was fuel. I wanted the general to hear this. I wanted him to see exactly who they were. I picked up the heavy silver tray balancing 6 crystal glasses and the open bottle of wine. I smoothed down the front of my white apron and pushed open the swinging kitchen door. "Dinner will be served shortly," I announced, my voice quiet and submissive, keeping my eyes lowered. I walked into the living room. The general was standing by the fireplace, his back to me, looking at the family photos on the mantel. The photos that only showed Andre. My parents and Brad were standing near the sofa, watching him like hawks. At the sound of my voice, General Sterling turned around. "Ah, here is the help," Brad announced loudly, snapping his fingers. "Sophia, bring the general a glass of the red, and try not to spill it this time." General Sterling looked at me. His eyes widened. The recognition was instant and absolute. He took a step forward, mouth opening slightly, his right hand twitching at his side, instinctively starting the motion of a salute. "Colonel," he began, the word forming on his lips. I locked eyes with him. I did not blink. I did not smile. I stared straight into his pupils and gave the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of my head. My eyes widened just a fraction, signaling him with the intensity of a battlefield command, "Stand down." The general froze. He was a master tactician. He processed the scene in a microsecond. The maid uniform, the humiliating command from the son-in-law, the lies about my mental state. He saw the trap I had laid. He stopped his salute mid-motion, turning it smoothly into a gesture of reaching for his tie, adjusting the knot. "Colonel, O'Neill architecture," he said, recovering smoothly, his voice betraying nothing. "Is this a colonial-style home, Mrs. Williams?" "It is quite distinctive." My father let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, oblivious to the near miss. "Yes, General, early colonial revival. We have renovated it extensively." General Sterling turned back to me, taking the glass of wine from my tray. His hand brushed mine, and for a brief second, he squeezed my fingers, a silent message of solidarity and suppressed fury. "Thank you," he said to me, his voice thick with meaning. "Thank you for your service tonight, young lady." I nodded, keeping my head down. "You are welcome, sir." As I moved to serve Brad, he leaned back in his chair, looking at the general with a smug expression. "See, General, she is useful in her own way. We try to find a purpose for everyone, even the broken ones." General Sterling took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving Brad's face, watching him with the cold, detached interest of a predator watching prey. "Interesting. Philosophy. the general said softly. Very interesting. I look forward to seeing exactly how you manage your assets, Mr. Evans. I have a feeling this dinner is going to be very educational. I walked back toward the kitchen, feeling the general's gaze burning into my back. He knew. He was furious, but he would hold the line. The trap was set, and the mouse had just invited the cat to feast. The dinner conversation moved with the sluggish inevitability of a car crash in slow motion. I stood by the sideboard, my hands folded in front of my white apron, blending into the wallpaper just as I had been ordered. The air in the dining room was thick with the smell of roasted meat and the even heavier stench of Brad's desperation. He was currently midway through a monologue about his philosophy on wealth management, a speech I suspected he had rehearsed in front of the mirror earlier that day. General Sterling sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his food barely touched. He was watching Brad with the unblinking intensity of a hawk circling a field mouse. But Brad, in his infinite arrogance, mistook the general's silence for admiration. You see, General, Brad said, swirling the wine in his glass aggressively, the red liquid splashing dangerously close to the rim. In the corporate world, much like in the military, I assume, efficiency is king. You cannot carry dead weight. If an asset is not performing, you cut it loose. You liquidate it. General Sterling slowly turned his head, his eyes shifting from Brad to me, standing silently in the shadows, and then back to Brad. Dead weight, the general repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Is that how you view people, Mr. Evans? As assets to be liquidated? Brad laughed, a sharp, barking sound that grated against the crystal glassware. Absolutely, General. Take my situation, for example. I am a self-made man. I built my portfolio from the ground up. But when you marry into a family like this one, you inherit liabilities. He gestured vaguely around the table, encompassing my parents who smiled nervously, desperate to please him. I carry a lot on my shoulders, Brad continued, leaning back in my father's chair, claiming it as his own. I support my husband, Andre, of course, supporting his creative endeavors, but I also have to carry the extended family when they stumble. And let me tell you, General, they stumble often. He paused for dramatic effect, taking a sip of wine. Take my sister-in-law, Sophia, here, Brad said, pointing his fork at me without looking my way. We are currently housing her, feeding her, giving her a purpose. It is exhausting, quite frankly, having to support a 38-year-old woman who has nothing to show for her life. No career, no husband, no assets. It is a drain on my resources, but what can I do? I am a generous man. The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at his plate, his face flushing a deep, shame-filled red. My mother picked at her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. But General Sterling did not look away. He set his knife and fork down on the table, with a deliberate clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Is that a fact? The general asked, his voice icy. You consider her to be useless? A liability? Brad shrugged, oblivious to the temperature drop in the room. Well, look at her, General. She is pouring wine while I am discussing multi-million-dollar contracts with you. The hierarchy is clear, isn't it? Some people are born to lead, and some are born to serve. I just wish she would serve with a little more gratitude. I felt a burning sensation in my chest, not of shame, but of pure, cold fury. I watched General Sterling's hand curl into a fist on the white tablecloth, his knuckles turning white. He was a man who had seen me coordinate airstrikes that saved thousands of lives. He knew exactly who was born to lead and who was just a parasite in a suit. I stepped forward to refill the general's water glass, moving silently. Brad, seemingly irritated that the attention had shifted even slightly away from him, gestured wildly with his wine glass. "And that is the problem with the system today," he pontificated, his arm flailing. "We reward mediocrity. We keep people like her comfortable instead of forcing them to—" His hand struck the water pitcher I was holding. The impact was jarring. The pitcher remained steady in my hand, thanks to years of physical training, but Brad's wineglass went flying. It tumbled through the air in a slow red arc before crashing onto the table. It did not break, but the contents, the expensive vintage Cabernet, splashed violently across the table, dripping onto the pristine white rug and soaking into the front of Brad's trousers and his polished Italian leather loafers. "Damn it!" Brad shouted, jumping up from his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Look what you did, you clumsy idiot!" I stood perfectly still, the water pitcher held firmly in my hand. I had not moved. It was his own flailing arm that caused the accident, but in Brad's world, nothing was ever his fault. My mother gasped, putting her hand to her throat. "Oh my goodness, the rug! The Persian rug!" Brad ignored her, staring down at his stained shoes and pants, his face twisting into a mask of ugly rage. He turned on me, his eyes bulging. "You did that on purpose," he hissed, spitting the words at me. "You are jealous. You wanted to ruin this dinner because you cannot stand to see me succeeding with the general." I remained silent, my face impassive. I did not defend myself. I did not apologize. I just looked at him with a detachment that seemed to infuriate him even more. General Sterling began to stand up, his chair pushing back, his face darkening with the promise of violence. "Sit down, General," Brad said, waving a hand dismissively. "I will handle this. We need to teach her a lesson about responsibility." Brad pointed a shaking finger at the floor, at the puddle of wine soaking into the rug and splattering his shoes. "Clean it up," he ordered. I looked at the mess, then back at him. I said, "Clean it up," Brad shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "And do not just stand there. Get down on your knees and scrub it out right now before it sets." The room seemed to tilt. My father looked up, his eyes wide with panic. "Brad, what are you doing? Let her just get a mop." "No, Marcus," Brad cut him off. "This is about respect. She needs to learn her place. She acts like she is too good for this family, strutting around with her fake pride." "Well, pride does not pay the bills, Sophia. Humility does." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Kneel, Sophia. Kneel down and wipe my shoes and then scrub this floor until I can see my reflection in it. Do it now or get out of this house and never come back." I looked at General Sterling. I saw the vein throbbing in his temple. I saw him calculating the distance between him and Brad, estimating how many seconds it would take to dismantle him. I gave him a microscopic shake of my head, telling him to wait. The payoff had to be absolute. I set the water pitcher down on the sideboard, carefully, deliberate. I picked up a white linen cloth from the stack of napkins I turned toward Brad. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the ragged breathing of my mother, who looked like she might faint. I walked toward him. My steps were slow, measured. I was not walking like a maid terrified of losing her job. I was walking like a soldier approaching a target, observing the enemy, finding the weak point. Brad watched me come, a smirk playing on his lips, thinking he had won, thinking he had finally broken the kernel. I stopped 2 feet in front of him. I looked down at his wine-soaked shoes, then up at his face. He expected me to drop to my knees. He expected me to beg. Instead, I stood there, clutching the white cloth, the symbol of the surrender he demanded, and I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just heard the trap snap shut. "You want me to clean your mess, Brad?" I asked, my voice soft, terrifyingly calm. "Yes," Brad said, puffing out his chest. "I want you to kneel." I tightened my grip on the cloth. "I will not be kneeling tonight, Brad, but I will make sure everything gets cleaned up, starting with you." The white linen cloth slipped from my fingers and drifted to the floor, landing softly on the Persian rug that my mother was so worried about. It lay there, between Brad's wine-soaked shoes and my feet, a silent declaration of war. The silence in the dining room was heavy, suffocating, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out by the sheer audacity of my refusal. Brad blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at the cloth on the floor, then up at me, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "You did not just drop that," he sputtered, his voice rising in disbelief. "Pick it up, Sophia. Pick it up right now and get on your knees." I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply looked at him with a gaze so cold it could have frozen the wine in his glass. "I am done picking up after you, Brad," I said, my voice steady and clear, projecting from the diaphragm just as I would on a command deck. "I am done cleaning your messes. I am done listening to your lies, and I am certainly done pretending that you are anything other than a small, petty thief in a cheap suit." My mother let out a strangled gasp, clutching her pearls. "Sophia, have you lost your mind?" "Talk to him with respect. He is the reason we are all eating tonight." I turned my gaze to her for a brief second. "No, Mother," I said calmly. "He is the reason you are about to lose your appetite." I reached behind my back and untied the knot of the white apron. The fabric loosened around my waist, falling away from my body. I grabbed it by the strings and pulled it off, balling the cheap polyester up in my fist. With a deliberate motion, I tossed the apron onto the center of the dining table. It landed right in the middle of the untouched roast beef, a stain on their perfect dinner. My father stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Sophia, get out! You are drunk. Or insane. Get out of my house before I call the police." "You do not need to call them, Dad," I said, locking eyes with him. "They are already on their way." Before my father could respond, a sharp electronic trill cut through the chaos. It was not a normal ringtone. It was the urgent, harsh buzz of a secured military line coming from the breast pocket of General Sterling's uniform jacket. The general held up a hand, silencing my father instantly. The room froze. General Sterling reached into his pocket and pulled out the phone. He did not look at the screen. He knew exactly who was calling. He pressed the answer button, and then, with a movement that felt like a judge bringing down a gavel, he placed the phone on the table and hit the speakerphone button. "Report," General Sterling barked, his eyes fixed on Brad's face. A female voice, crisp and professional, filled the dining room, amplified by the silence. It was the voice of the Secretary of Defense's liaison at the Pentagon. General, we have completed the final audit of the Vanguard Systems proposal. The voice said clearly, Project Orion is terminated, effective immediately. We have flagged multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of federal documents. My father grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Terminated? What? But we are signing tomorrow. The voice on the phone continued, ignoring him. The evidence package was just uploaded to the secure server. It is comprehensive, General. The whistleblower tracked the shell companies in the Cayman Islands and the unauthorized access to the classified blueprints. General Sterling leaned forward. Who provided the evidence? The audit was authorized and executed by the Program Executive Officer, the voice replied. Colonel Sophia Williams. Her digital signature is on the arrest warrants. The name hung in the air like a physical object. Colonel Sophia Williams. My father blinked, shaking his head as if trying to clear water from his ears. I am sorry, he stammered, looking at the phone, then at the general. There must be a mistake. You said Colonel Williams. There is no Colonel Williams here. That is my daughter Sophia. She is unemployed. Brad let out a nervous laugh, looking around wildly. Exactly. This is a prank, right? Sophia, did you set this up? Is this some kind of sick joke, using a recording? General Sterling stood up. He did not stand up like a dinner guest. He stood up like a titan rising from a throne. He pushed his chair back and turned his entire body toward me. I was standing by the sideboard, still wearing the black dress, but the apron was gone and my shoulders were squared. The general brought his right hand up in a sharp, crisp arc, snapping his fingertips to the brim of his brow in a perfect salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was a salute rendered from a subordinate to a superior officer. Good evening, ma'am, General Sterling said, his voice booming with respect. We were waiting for your signal. I stood tall, returning the salute with the practiced ease of 15 years of service. At ease, General, I said, my voice dropping into its natural command register. Sterling dropped his hand and stood at attention, his eyes shining with pride. The orders have been cut, Colonel. The military police are holding the perimeter, awaiting your command to breach. The sound of my title coming from a 4-star general seemed to physically strike my family. My mother collapsed back into her chair, her hand covering her mouth. My father looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in decades, and saw the stranger standing in his dining room. Colonel, my father whispered the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. But you are a maid. I walked over to the table, moving past Brad, who had backed away until he hit the wall. I reached into the hidden pocket of the black dress and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I tipped it over, and a heavy silver object slid out onto the mahogany table with a heavy clatter. It was my rank insignia, the silver eagle of a full colonel shining under the chandelier light. Next to it, I placed my real ID, the one Brad had not found, the one with the biometric chip that unlocked the Pentagon war rooms. I am not a maid, Dad, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. I am the Program Executive Officer for the United States Air Force. I control the budget for every missile system in the North American hemisphere. And for the last 24 hours, I have been the lead investigator into the criminal enterprise running out of this house. Brad made a choking sound. Colonel, you cannot be. You drive a Ford. You have no money. I turned to look at him, and the look on my face made him shrink back. I drive a Ford because it is armored, Brad. I have no money that you can see because I do not spend it on cheap suits and fraudulent lifestyles to impress people I do not like. I earn more in a month than you have stolen in your entire miserable career. I looked at General Sterling, nodding at the phone on the table. Execute the warrant, General, I said, pointing at Brad. Get him out of my sight. General Sterling spoke into the phone, sending the code word that would bring the world crashing down on their heads. Copy that, Colonel. The hammer is dropping now. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder with every second, I looked at my family. The dinner was over, the reckoning had arrived, and the maid had just taken command of the house. The dining room windows flashed with a chaotic rhythm of red and blue light as the wail of sirens cut through the suburban silence, shattering the last illusion of my family's perfect life. The front door did not just open. It exploded inward with the force of a battering ram, followed instantly by the heavy rhythmic thud of tactical boots hitting the hardwood floor. Federal agents, everyone stay where you are, hands in the air. The command was shouted with the kind of volume that bypasses the conscious brain and triggers pure instinct. My mother, Bernice, screamed the high-pitched sound of terror and dropped to the floor, covering her head with her hands. My father, Marcus, stood frozen near the fireplace, his face draining of all color, looking like a statue of a man watching his world burn. Brad, however, did the one thing his arrogance would not let him stop doing. He tried to negotiate. Now see here, Brad shouted, stepping away from the wall, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. There is a misunderstanding. My name is Brad Evans. I am a financial advisor, and we are having dinner with General Sterling. If you just let me explain. 2 military police officers in full tactical gear moved on him with the speed of a striking cobra. They did not want an explanation. They wanted a suspect secured. Before Brad could finish his sentence, he was spun around and slammed chest first against the floral wallpaper. His expensive silk tie crushed against the drywall. Get off me! Brad howled, struggling against the grip of the officers. Do you know who I am? I will sue you. I will have your badges for... This General Sterling stood calmly by the table, sipping his water, as if he were watching a training exercise. He looked at me and nodded, giving me the floor. I walked toward the officers, my heels clicking on the floorboards that I had scrubbed so many times as a child. The officers looked at me, and seeing the rank insignia I had placed on the table, they nodded, deferring to my authority. Officer, secure that man, I said, pointing a steady finger at Brad. On what charges? Brad spat, twisting his head to look at me, his eyes bulging with hate. You have nothing on me, Sophia. This is a setup. I stepped closer, reciting the list of crimes I had been compiling for the last 24 hours. The list was long, and it was watertight. Bradley Evans, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud against the United States Department of Defense, I began, my voice filling the room. Specifically, the diversion of $2.4 million from the Vanguard Systems projectile contract into offshore accounts under your control. Brad's face went slack. The struggling stopped. I continued, relentless. You are also charged with the destruction of federal property, specifically the mutilation of a Department of Defense common access card issued to a superior officer. And finally, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which applies to contractors operating under federal purview, you are charged with disrespect toward a commissioned officer. I picked up the pieces of my cut ID card from where I had left them on the sideboard and held them up. You cut this, Brad, thinking it was a toy, I said quietly. You thought you were just bullying your sister-in-law. But in the eyes of the law, you were destroying a government key capable of accessing nuclear launch protocols. That is a felony, with a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years. The officers pulled Brad's arms behind his back, the metallic ratchet of the handcuffs echoing loudly in the room. "You set me up!" Brad screamed, spit flying from his mouth as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. "You tricked me. You walked around here like a bum, driving that trash car. You lied to us!" I walked right up to him until I was inches from his face. I signaled the officers to pause for a second. "I did not lie, Brad," I whispered, leaning in so only he could hear the venom in my voice. "I told you I worked for the government. You just assumed that meant I was beneath you because your ego could not imagine a world where the black sheep was the shepherd. I am not a bum, Brad," I continued, my voice dropping lower. "I am the program executive officer. I am the signature on the bottom of the check that pays for your house, your car, and your pathetic lifestyle. I have been your boss for 3 years, and tonight, I just fired you." "Take him away." The officers hauled Brad toward the door. He was weeping now, his bravado completely gone, replaced by the pathetic sobbing of a man who knows his life is over. My sister, Andre, who had been hiding in the kitchen doorway, ran out trying to grab Brad's arm. "Brad, no! You cannot take him! He has a meeting tomorrow!" Andre wailed, clutching at the officers' uniforms. "Ma'am, step back or you will be detained for obstruction," an officer barked, pushing Andre aside gently but firmly. As Brad was dragged out into the night, screaming my name with a mix of hatred and terror, the room fell silent again. General Sterling turned his attention to my father. Marcus was still standing by the fireplace, trembling. He looked at the general, then at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "General," my father stammered, trying to find his voice. I had no idea Brad was... if he was stealing, that has nothing to do with me. I am a loyal employee of Vanguard. I have given 20 years to this company." General Sterling walked over to the dining table. He picked up the taped-together blueprint, the one my father had ripped earlier that evening, the one where I had corrected the fatal flaw in the fuel valve. He held it up, the Scotch tape glinting in the chandelier light. "Is this your signature on the approval line, Marcus?" the general asked, his voice deceptively mild. "Yes, General," my father said, nodding eagerly. "That is the Orion fuel schematic. I was reviewing it at home just to be extra sure everything was perfect for you." "Reviewing it at home," Sterling repeated, his voice hardening. "And who gave you authorization to remove top-secret technical data from the secure facility?" My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the window, then at the floor. "There is no authorization for that, Marcus." The general slammed the document down on the table, making my mother jump. "Taking this document out of the building is a violation of the Espionage Act. But allowing an unauthorized civilian to handle it, to deface it, and then taping it back together like a child's art project instead of reporting the breach." The general shook his head, looking at my father with profound disappointment. "You are the Director of Security Compliance, Marcus. You are supposed to be the gatekeeper. Instead, you let a fox into the henhouse, and you handed in the keys." "General, please," my father begged, tears welling in his eyes. "I was just trying to ensure the contract went through. I need this job. I have a mortgage. You have a severe lapse in judgment," General Sterling cut him off. "You stood by and watched a civilian insult a colonel. You allowed classified data to be compromised. And you endorsed a financial predator because he bought you a steak dinner. The general reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a formal letter. He tossed it onto the table next to my rank insignia. Your security clearance is revoked, effective immediately, Marcus. You are relieved of your duties at Vanguard Systems. Security personnel will escort you to your office tomorrow to collect your personal effects. Do not attempt to log into the company network. Your access has already been terminated. My father collapsed into the chair behind him, looking as if he had been punched in the gut. Fired, stripped of his clearance. In the defense industry, that was a death sentence. He would never work in this town again. Sophia, he whispered, looking up at me with pleading eyes. You can fix this, right? You are the program executive officer. You can tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I am your father. I looked at the man who had watched me scrub his floors yesterday. The man who had laughed when Brad told me to clean his shoes. I picked up my rank insignia from the table and pinned it onto the collar of my black dress, transforming the maid uniform into something else entirely. I cannot do that, Marcus, I said, using his first name just as he had used mine, like a stranger. A colonel does not protect compromise. She eliminates it. You taught me that actions have consequences. Well, these are yours. I turned to General Sterling. The site is secure, General. The evidence is logged. Sterling nodded, putting on his cover. Let us go, Colonel. We have a debriefing at the Pentagon. I walked toward the door, leaving my parents sitting in the ruins of their dinner party. My mother was sobbing into her hands. My father was staring blankly at the wall and the empty chair. Where Brad had sat was a stark reminder of the hole they had dug for themselves. I did not look back. I walked out into the cool night air, took a deep breath, and got into the back of the General's armored SUV, leaving the house and the name Sophia, the failure, behind me, forever. The heavy oak front door slammed shut, echoing through the house like the final note of a funeral dirge. The flashing red and blue lights outside continued to paint the living room walls in a chaotic rhythm, but the screaming had stopped, leaving behind a silence that was somehow louder than the sirens had been. My brother Andre stood in the center of the foyer, staring at the closed door where his husband had just been dragged out in handcuffs. He looked like a child whose balloon had popped, utterly unable to comprehend that the party was over and there would be no cake. Then the shock wore off and the hysteria set in. Andre turned to me, his face streaked with tears and snot, his expensive cashmere sweater looking suddenly ridiculous in the context of the disaster. He rushed toward me, stumbling over the rug that I had refused to clean. Sophia, you have to stop them! He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin with desperate strength. You have to call them back right now. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them Brad is innocent. He is a good man, Sophia. He is just ambitious. You cannot let him go to federal prison. He will die in there. I looked down at his hand, gripping my arm, feeling nothing but a profound sense of detachment. I gently but firmly removed his hand, pushing him back half a step. I cannot stop a federal investigation, Andre, I said, my voice calm and even. Brad committed crimes. The evidence is irrefutable. He stole from the taxpayers, and he stole from the military. There is no undo button for that. No, 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 Andre wailed, dropping to his knees, clutching at the hem of my black dress. Please, Sophia, I am begging you. He is my husband. I love him. We have a life. We have plans. You cannot destroy my family just because you are jealous of us. Jealous. The word hung in the air, bitter and absurd. Even now, kneeling in the wreckage of his own life, he still believed that I envied him. He still believed that his leased cars and credit card debt were things to be coveted. I am not jealous, Andre, I said, looking down at him. I am just the person who finally turned on the lights. You have been living in the dark, pretending the monsters were not real. Well, now you can see them. My mother, Bernice, who had been sitting on the sofa in a catatonic state, suddenly sprang to life. She did not rush to comfort her son. She rushed to attack me. She flew across the room, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred that I had never seen before, not even in my worst childhood memories. "You are a monster!" she shrieked, shoving me hard in the shoulder. "How could you do this? To your own flesh and blood? You planned this, didn't you? You sat there in that basement, plotting like a spider, waiting to destroy us." She poked a finger into my chest, her perfectly manicured nail digging into my skin. "We took you in, Sophia. We gave you a place to sleep when we thought you were homeless. And this is how you repay us? By arresting Brad? By getting your father fired? You are evil. You are a devil sent to ruin this family." I took a step back, putting distance between myself and her venom. "You did not take me in, Mother," I said, my voice hardening. "You hid me. You put me in a storage room and tried to use me as a servant to impress a general. You did not care if I was homeless. You only cared if I was visible to the neighbors." "You ruined everything!" she screamed, ignoring my words, tearing at her own hair. "You humiliated us in front of General Sterling. You destroyed your father's career over a piece of paper. Do you know what you have done? We will lose the house. We will lose everything." "You were already losing the house," I pointed out coldly. "Brad was paying the mortgage with embezzled funds. The moment the audit started, this house was gone. You just didn't know it yet." My father, Marcus, was still sitting on the floor by the fireplace. He hadn't moved since the general took his security badge. He was staring at the empty air, mumbling to himself, repeating the words "revoked" over and over again. Andre looked up from the floor, his eyes red and swollen. "We have nothing," he sobbed. "We have no money. Brad accounts are frozen. How are we going to live? Sophia, how could you leave us with nothing?" I sighed, reaching into the leather portfolio I had been holding under my arm throughout the entire ordeal. There was one last item of business, one last secret that needed to be brought into the light. I pulled out a thick stack of documents, paper clipped together, and tossed them onto the coffee table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood made my mother flinch. "I am not leaving you with nothing, Andre," I said, pointing to the stack. "I am leaving you with your freedom, which is more than you deserve." "What is this?" my mother asked, staring at the paper suspiciously. "That is a forensic accounting report of my personal credit history," I said, watching their faces closely. "It details 3 credit cards, Black Tier American Express and a Visa Infinite, opened in the name of Sophia Williams using my social security number, but registered to a post office box in this neighborhood." The room went deadly silent. My mother's face went from red to a ghostly pale. Andre stopped crying and looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "You thought I was a ghost," I continued, my voice low and dangerous. "You thought, because I was overseas, because I was estranged, that I would never notice. You forged my signature. You used my identity to fund your lifestyle when Brad's money started running tight. There is $50,000 of debt on those cards. designer clothes, spa treatments, and a down payment on a Tesla. My mother began to stammer, backing away. Sophia, we were going to pay it back. We just needed a bridge loan until the Vanguard deal went through. We did it for the family. You did it because you are thieves. I cut her off. You stole my identity, just like Brad stole from the government. Identity theft is a felony, Mother. So is credit card fraud. I could have the police turn this car around. I could have you and Andre put in the back seat right next to Brad. Andre let out a whimper, curling into a ball on the floor. But I am not going to do that, I said, looking at them with a mixture of pity and disgust. I watched hope flicker in my mother's eyes, a pathetic, desperate hope. Why? She whispered. Because unlike you, I actually understand what family is supposed to mean, I said. I am not going to put my own mother and brother in prison. Not because you don't deserve it, but because I do not want the stain of your names on my service record. I walked over to the table and tapped the stack of papers I have, paid off the balances. I said, the accounts are closed. I will not press charges. This is my final gift to you, the last thing you will ever get from me. My father looked up from the floor, his eyes focusing on me for the first time. He looked old, broken, a shell of the man who had terrified me as a child. Sophia, he croaked, his voice cracking. You are leaving? Yes, Marcus, I said. I am leaving. But where will you go? He asked, a tear tracing a line through the sweat on his cheek. You are family. You belong here. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I belong at the Pentagon, Dad. I belong in a world where integrity matters. I have a flight to catch in 2 hours. My team is waiting for me. I turned toward the door. The house felt smaller now. The grand foyer with its high ceilings and chandelier felt like a cheap set on a stage that had been struck. The illusions were gone, leaving only the ugly reality of 4 walls and the people trapped inside them. Sophia, wait! My mother called out, her voice trembling, shifting from anger back to manipulation. You can't just walk out! We have no income! Your father is fired! How will we eat? Help us, Sophia, please! You have so much money, you said it yourself. Just give us a monthly allowance, something, until we get back on our feet. I stopped, with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to look at her one last time. You have hands, Mother, I said, staring at the wood grain of the door. You have health. You can work. There are plenty of jobs out there. I hear the cleaning crew at the office building downtown is hiring the night shift. I opened the door, and the cool night air rushed in, cleansing my lungs. General Sterling was waiting by the SUV, standing under the street lamp like a sentinel. The engine was running, a low hum of power and readiness. I stepped out onto the porch. Sophia, my father called out, his voice weak and desperate, practically a whisper from the floor where he sat amidst the ruins of his ego. I am sorry I paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough to hear the words fade into the night air. I did not reply. I did not look back at the man huddled on the floor, or the woman screaming in the hallway, or the brother weeping for his lost luxury. I walked down the steps, my head held high, my stride purposeful. I walked toward the waiting car, toward the general, toward my real life. I climbed into the back seat, and the heavy door thudded shut, sealing them out forever. Let's go, General, I said, looking straight ahead. As the convoy pulled away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see the house disappearing into the darkness. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt completely and utterly free. 6 months is a long time in the real world, but inside the concrete walls of the Federal Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland, time does not pass. It drags. The man formerly known as Bradley Evans sat on the edge of a steel bunk staring at the gray paint peeling from the wall just inches from his nose. He was no longer wearing the Italian silk suits that he had prized so highly. The crisp white shirts and polished loafers were gone, replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that smelled faintly of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. Earlier that morning, he had stood before a federal judge for his third bail hearing. His lawyer, a public defender who looked exhausted and uninterested, had tried to argue that Brad was not a flight risk, that he was a family man with deep roots in the community. The prosecutor simply played a 10-second audio clip from the wiretap evidence, the recording of Brad instructing an associate on how to wipe a server clean. The judge had hammered the gavel with a sound that rang in Brad's ears like a death knell. Bail denied. The trial date was set for next year, and given the mountain of evidence Sophia had compiled, the plea deal on the table was 15 years minimum. Brad's hands shook as he looked at his fingernails, which were ragged and bitten down to the quick. He thought about the country club lunches, the Teslas, the way he used to snap his fingers at waiters. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he realized that the person he had called useless was the one who had locked him in this cage and thrown away the key. While Brad was learning the new hierarchy of the cell block, where his financial advice was worth less than a pack of cigarettes, my brother Andre was learning a different kind of humility. The foreclosure on the colonial house had been swift and brutal. Since the mortgage payments had been made with illicit funds, the bank had seized the property immediately, invoking a clause that left the family with zero equity. I did not see the eviction, but I heard about it from the neighbors. Apparently, it was quite a spectacle. The repo truck had come for the Tesla Model X first, lifting it onto the flatbed while Andre screamed on the front lawn, clutching a box of his camera equipment. The neighbors, the ones they had tried so hard to impress, stood behind their curtains and watched the golden child crumble. Now, Andre spent his days standing behind a register at a discount grocery store 3 towns over. He wore a green vest that was too big for him and a name tag that hung crookedly on his chest. Beep, scan, slide. Beep, scan, slide. The rhythm of his new life was monotonous and unforgiving. I heard that last week, one of his old college friends came through his line, pushing a cart full of organic produce and expensive wine. Andre had tried to hide his face, ducking behind the monitor, but the man had recognized him, asking loudly if this was some kind of ironic social experiment. Andre had to force a smile and bag the man's groceries, muttering that he was just helping out a friend who owned the store. But as the automatic doors slid shut, watching his former peer walk out to a luxury sedan, Andre had slumped against the counter, finally understanding the weight of the work he had mocked me for doing. And then there were my parents, Marcus and Bernice. They had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the highway. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments, and the carpet was a shade of brown that hid stains, but not the smell of stale cigarettes left by previous tenants. My father sat in a recliner that he had managed to save from the estate sale, staring blankly at a small television set perched on a milk crate. His security clearance was gone, his pension was frozen pending the investigation, and his reputation in the defense industry was obliterated. He was an old man now, aged 10 years and 6 months. His posture permanently stooped by the weight of his shame. My mother bustled around the small kitchenette, heating up a can of soup on a hot plate. She did not hum anymore. She did not arrange flowers. She moved with the frantic energy of a woman trying to outrun her own thoughts, trying to pretend that this squalor was just a temporary setback. "Dinner's ready, Marcus," she called out, her voice thin and brittle. My father did not answer. He just turned up the volume on the TV. The evening news broadcast was transitioning from the weather to national politics. "And in Washington today," the announcer's voice filled the small room, "the president has officially appointed a new senior advisor for national security strategy. This follows the successful restructuring of the Vanguard defense contracts, which saved the taxpayers an estimated $4 billion. My mother froze, holding the ladle midair. She walked slowly into the living room, drawn by the gravity in the announcer's voice. On the screen, footage from the Pentagon briefing room appeared. Standing at the podium, flanked by flags and heavy mahogany paneling, was a woman in a deep blue Air Force dress uniform. The silver eagles on her shoulders caught the light, but it was the steel in her eyes that commanded attention. "Here is Colonel Sophia Williams speaking," earlier today the announcer said. My parents watched as the image of their daughter filled the screen. I looked strong, confident, and utterly untouchable. I was answering questions from the press corps with a precision that left no room for doubt. "Colonel Williams," a reporter asked off-screen, "what is your strategy for handling corruption in defense contracting moving forward?" On the screen, I leaned into the microphone, my expression calm. "My strategy is simple. Absolute accountability," I said, my voice echoing in the small apartment where my parents stood, paralyzed. "We will no longer tolerate those who view service as a means for personal profit. The days of hiding in the shadows are over." My father let out a long, shuddering breath. "Sophia," he whispered, reaching a hand toward the screen as if he could touch the ghost of the daughter he had thrown away. My mother dropped the ladle. It clattered onto the linoleum floor, splashing soup onto her shoes. But she didn't move. She just stared at the woman on the screen, the woman she had called slow, the woman she had tried to make a maid. And in that moment, looking at the power I wielded, she realized that she had been the slow one all along. She had held a diamond in her hands and thrown it in the mud because she wanted a piece of glass that sparkled a little brighter. 5 miles away, across the Potomac River, I sat in my new office in the E-ring of the Pentagon. The room was spacious, with a large window overlooking the Washington Monument. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the Capitol, painting the sky in colors of victory. The office was quiet, filled only with the hum of the secure server rack in the corner and the soft scratch of my pen against paper. I had just finished reviewing the final personnel files for my new task force. It was good work, necessary work. I pushed my chair back and stood up, walking over to the window. I took a sip of black coffee, enjoying the bitterness and the warmth. I felt a sense of peace that I had not known was possible. The anger was gone. The need for validation was gone, burned away by the fire of the last 6 months. I turned back to my desk and began to pack up for the day. As I reached into the bottom drawer to grab my secure phone, my hand brushed against an old shoebox. I paused, pulling it out. It was the only thing I had taken from the house that night, besides my uniform and my ID. I opened the lid. Inside was a single photograph. It was the one family portrait that used to hang in the hallway before they took it down. It was taken when I was 10 years old. I was standing in the back wearing a green dress, smiling shyly. My father had his hand on Andre's shoulder. My mother was holding Brad's arm. In a later photo, they had photoshopped in. But in this one, we looked like a family. I looked at their faces. My father's pride, my mother's vanity, Andre's spoiled grin, and my own hopeful eyes seeking approval that would never come. I looked at the photo for a long time, remembering the little girl who just wanted to be seen. I wanted to tell her that it was okay. I wanted to tell her that she didn't need them to see her because the world would see her. I stood up and walked over to the heavy-duty shredder in the corner of the office. The machine hummed to life as I approached, sensing the paper. I did not rip the photo. I did not cry. I simply fed it into the slot, watching as the faces of my past were pulled down into the teeth of the machine. The sound was quick and final. The machine whirred for a second longer, digesting the last of the glossy paper, and then fell silent. The family was gone, turned into confetti to be recycled into something new. I smiled. A genuine, soft smile. I walked back to my desk, picked up my coffee, and took one last look at the view. The city lights were flickering on a grid of power and possibility. They called me nothing, I said softly, my voice filling the empty room. They called me a failure. They called me a maid. They thought because I was quiet, I was weak. Picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door, turning off the lights as I went, leaving the office in darkness save for the glowing seal of the United States on the wall. But they forgot the most important rule of engagement, I thought, as I walked down the long corridor, my heels clicking with the rhythm of authority. Never underestimate the person who listens while you talk. Never underestimate the person who observes while you brag. And never, ever underestimate the person who is willing to be nothing, because when they finally decide to be something, they will be everything. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed, sealing off the past. This is Colonel Williams, signing off. The mission is complete. My journey taught me that true power never needs to shout. While my family measured worth by flash and noise, I learned that integrity is the only currency that truly matters. They mistook my silence for weakness, unaware that I was building an empire in the dark. Your value is never defined by those who refuse to see it. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to truly rise. If you have ever had to build your success in silence while others doubted you, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to know their victory is coming.